There comes a moment in a man's life when silence becomes heavier than words, when doubt grows louder than any argument, and when your instincts whisper a truth you don't want to face, you don't want to explode, you don't want to accuse, you don't want to become the angry man she uses against you later. What you really want is clarity. You want the truth, not because you enjoy confrontation, but because peace is impossible without it. And female psychology reveals a powerful truth. Yelling never makes a woman confess, but calm control often does. A cheating wife will not break under pressure. She will break under the weight of her own mind. Women do not confess because someone is shouting at them. They confess when their emotional defenses collapse from tension, guilt, and psychological contrast. When a man becomes unpredictable, she digs deeper into lies. But when a man becomes calm, observant, and emotionally detached, she begins to panic internally. Not because he's angry, but because she can sense she's losing the influence she once had over him. The first step is emotional neutrality, not coldness, not rage, not dramatic silence, just controlled calm. When a woman hides something serious, she expects an explosion. She prepares for yelling, accusations, and emotional chaos. When none of that comes, her mind loses the script she rehearsed. She planned to defend herself from anger, not from calm detachment, and that shift alone destabilizes her. She begins wondering what you know, how much you know, and what you are waiting for. The uncertainty eats at her far more than any confrontation ever could. Female psychology is sensitive to emotional contrast. When a man who normally reacts suddenly becomes composed, she feels exposed. She interprets that quiet as strength. She interprets your calm as knowledge. She interprets your steady tone as evidence that you are already aware of what she has done. And that silent pressure makes her anxious, restless, and more likely to slip into honesty. The second step is removing the emotional cushion she relies on. Cheating wives often hide the truth because they believe they can control the narrative. They rely on your emotions to guide their lies. If you become angry, they play the victim. If you become confused, they deflect. If you become desperate, they manipulate. But the one thing they cannot handle is emotional clarity. When a man sees things with calm, quiet conviction, she loses the ability to steer the conversation. Your silence becomes stronger than her explanations. Your eye contact becomes sharper than your words. Your calm questions become harder to avoid than any argument. And most importantly, your energy stops feeding her excuses. She begins confessing small details without realizing it, not because you pressured her, but because the psychological space she used to hide in no longer exists. The third step is controlled vulnerability. This does not mean begging or pleading. It means expressing your feelings in a steady, composed voice without blame. Women respond to emotional truth. If you speak with calm sincerity, she feels the weight of what she's doing in a way anger could never create. Say what you feel, not to accuse her, but to center your own reality. When a man speaks from grounded truth, a guilty woman's defenses weaken. She begins seeing the emotional damage she caused. She begins sensing the distance growing between you. She begins fearing the moment you stop trying to understand and start walking away. A cheating wife does not fear losing the argument. She fears losing the man who once believed in her. And when she senses that emotional shift, the truth becomes harder for her to hold inside. The fourth step is asking questions in a way that leaves no room for emotional escape. Do not ask questions that rely on yes or no. Do not ask questions that trigger defensiveness. Ask questions that require reflection. Ask questions that force her to explain, not deny. When you ask an open question with calm curiosity, her brain cannot hide behind quick lies. Lies require emotional energy. Calm questions disarm that energy. If she becomes defensive, do not match her tone. Return to calm neutrality. Say less. Listen more. Observation is your power. When she feels she is talking more than you, her emotional balance shifts. She starts revealing inconsistencies. She starts adding unnecessary details. She starts contradicting herself, and eventually, she loses the structure of her lie. Not because you caught her, but because she trapped herself through her own words. Female psychology reacts strongly to internal pressure. When you remain unshaken, she becomes unstable. When you remain patient, she becomes overwhelmed. When you remain silent at the right moments, she fills the space with truth she never planned to reveal. This is not manipulation. This is the natural collapse of emotional dishonesty when faced with steady masculinity. The fifth step is the moment of reflective silence. After she speaks, do not respond immediately. Let the silence sit between you. Women feel silence as pressure. They interpret silence as judgment. They cannot handle long pauses when they know they are lying. When you pause, allowing her words to land, she feels the weight of her actions. Her anxiety rises, her conscience wakes up, her emotional walls begin to crumble. And often, the truth follows that silence, like a confession, she can no longer hold. The sixth step is removing the safety net she expects. Many cheating wives assume their husband will chase the truth, beg for reassurance, or fight emotionally. When you stop doing any of that, when you remain steady and distant, she loses the power she was using to maintain the lie. She begins fearing the loss of the relationship more than the confession itself. She becomes more concerned about salvaging the connection than maintaining the deception. Women confess not when they are pressured, but when they feel the relationship slipping away in a way they cannot control. Calm emotional distance hits harder than yelling ever could. She begins trying to justify herself, then explain herself, then soften the truth. And eventually, she admits what she has been hiding. Not because you forced her to, but because her emotional world became too heavy to hold alone. The seventh step is emotional detachment, not punishment. When you stop protecting her feelings and start protecting your peace, she feels the shift. Women can sense emotional independence immediately. When a man stops reacting emotionally, he becomes unpredictable. Unpredictability triggers fear. Fear triggers confession. Not because she wants to hurt you, but because she wants to regain the emotional stability she lost. Women confess to restore emotional balance. The final step, the truth trigger, is giving her space to speak without interruption. If she senses no threat, no anger, no attack, she feels safer telling the truth. Cheating wives avoid confession because they fear emotional explosion. But when the environment is calm, quiet, and controlled, the fear of the unknown becomes more powerful than the fear of honesty. She tells the truth because her mind can no longer hold the burden of pretending. And here is the deepest psychological truth. Women do not confess because a man demands the truth. They confess because a man creates an emotional atmosphere where lies cannot survive. You make her tell the truth not by yelling, not by accusing, not by chasing, but by becoming the version of yourself she cannot manipulate. Calm, steady, detached, observant. When you stop fighting for the truth comes to you. When you stop reacting to her behavior reveals itself. And when you stop giving her emotional safety, she exposes her own guilt. A cheating wife cannot lie comfortably in the presence of a calm man who sees her clearly. Her guilt grows heavier, her excuses lose power, her emotional walls crack under the weight of silence. And eventually, she tells the truth, not to save herself, but because the emotional pressure becomes impossible to carry. This is how a man learns the truth without raising his voice once. Not through anger, but through mastery of